Hey everybody, my name's Aaron. Welcome back to the channel. Well, if you've been following my episodes that I've been releasing here on YouTube, you know that I've had a whole series now talking about the Apple I. I went over the history of the Apple I. I showed you how to build an Apple I from scratch. Then I designed this case, which is a replica of the case that was used on the early Apple I's that came out. And then today we're going to be talking about how to get software loaded on the Apple I. So this whole series has been about replicating an Apple I, exactly the way it looks, the way it would be if you came across one in the wild. But that's not really useful if you can't run any software on it. And there are some tricks to getting software to load on the Apple I. So that's what we're going to talk about today on the Retro Hack Shack. Now, before I get into today's episode, I did want to bring up a couple of resources I'm going to be using throughout the episode, and I wanted to let you know about them. The first one is a set of replicated manuals. These would have been the Apple I manuals that came out with the Apple I itself, with the cassette interface, and even an ad. Let me show you these real quick. So these are actually painstakingly reproduced by Armin Herstetter. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly. Armin Herstetter has reproduced these, doing the typesetting, getting everything to be exactly as it would have been. When you would have purchased your Apple I, you could have got these manuals, and it even has a replica Byte Shop stamp on the Apple I manual. So he's got the Apple I manual. He also has a reproduction of the Apple I cassette interface manual. These have the schematics inside, which are really necessary and helpful when you're building an Apple I. He also has a reproduction of the ad that came out, the full page ad for the Apple I, showing it on sale for $666.66. And then he has a replica of the Apple Basic User's Manual. So I'm going to be using these today, mainly the Apple Basic Manual and the cassette interface manual. And I just wanted to let you know, he sent me some of these. They're really, really high quality. The paper is thick. It's not the thin paper that you get in today's manual. It just feels like you're holding the real thing. So in this episode, he has generously offered to donate a few copies of these to some lucky viewers on the YouTube channel. And if you're interested in that, all you need to do is go down to the comment section, leave a comment about the episode, and tag it with hashtag Retro Hack Shack, all one word. Hashtag Retro Hack Shack. Just leave it down in the comments for this particular episode, and I will pick someone. I'll pick two people to donate a set of these manuals. Very high quality, as I said. They're not cheap because there's a lot of work that goes into producing these manuals. So if you're interested, again, leave some sort of comment down below. Hey, I like your channel, or I want to see more episodes about such and such, whatever. And then just add the hashtag Retro Hack Shack. That's all you need to do. And I'll let this run for about 2 weeks, and then I'll come back and I will pick a winner and contact you if you have won the set of manuals. Again, there'll be two winners. So take advantage of this opportunity, and I really appreciate his generosity for not only sending me a few copies, but also offering to donate or gift a few copies to a few lucky channel viewers. So really cool. The other thing that I'm going to be using today is, of course, and I don't have it here, it's in the back of the monitor here, is the RGB to HDMI. Now, you know, if you're a viewer of my channel, that I love this project. I sell it on my website, retrohackshack.com/shop. You can purchase it there when it's in stock. It sells out almost immediately every time. But one of the developers, Ian, who I've been working very closely with, has actually developed a profile for the Apple I specifically. So now you can get HDMI output on your Apple I. So if you wanted to put some of the software today up on a big projector in your backyard and show it to your friends, that makes it much easier to do that, especially given some of the video quirks of the Apple I. So I'm going to be using that to capture the output today so you can see it a bit more clearly as I go through how to load software on the Apple I. So thanks to Ian for developing that profile and working with me on getting it just right For my particular Apple One, because the video signal can differ based on what kind of mod you need to do and what kind of components you use inside, it can actually cause some sync issues and some different things, quirkiness about the video signal. So go back and watch one of my previous episodes where I talk about adding a monitor to the Apple One, and you'll see the mod that I did to get mine to work correctly with a monitor. So with that being said, let's jump in and talk about getting software onto the Apple One. Just as a reminder, in the second part of this series where I put the board together and built the Apple One motherboard, I also built the ACI, or Apple Cassette Interface, that we'll be using for this project. So if you haven't seen that episode and you want to know what that is and what it's all about, I recommend clicking the link above and watching that episode, and that'll get you up to speed with what we're about to tackle here. Okay, so we have the Apple One cassette interface, which is going to be how we load programs into the Apple One. But we also need a tape player, cassette tape player, to actually play the tapes, which get loaded into the computer. And it also should look period to this time, 1976 or thereabouts. So if you look in Mike Willigall's build guide, you'll notice that he actually recommends a cassette player that he's used with great success, and it's this one. This is the Panasonic RQ2102 Slimline, and it has very period styling in terms of the grill up here at the top of the cassette unit. Pretty basic controls, and on the side, like you see here, there's mic input, monitor output, which is really important, volume, which is great, and then of course we have power. It also runs off of I think 4C volt batteries, or 6 volt DC. Somewhere I think there's a 6 volt DC in somewhere. Maybe not. Mike recommends this one because he says it's very reliable, seems to work every time. And if you've ever tried to load tapes onto your Commodore 64 or onto an Atari, for example, there was they each had their own proprietary cassette players. So there was for the C64, there was the Commodore Dataset. And then for the Atari 8-bit line, there was the 410. And then I think there was another one that came out later, maybe the 1050. Anyway, those were very similar, except those had proprietary connections to plug into their respective computers. This is just a generic cassette player. I don't think anyone at this point, had thought of, making something proprietary. Certainly not with the Apple One. So this is one option. However, the RQ2102 was definitely not used back in 1976 and would never have been recommended by Apple. The reason is because this particular cassette recorder was made in the early 90s, I believe. You can still buy them, actually. Panasonic manufactured these for a long, long time. However, I bet if we broke open this thing and looked at the date codes on the integrated circuits, we would find that this was manufactured somewhere in 89, 90, 91, something like that. That's when they produced this particular unit. In addition to this, though, there was actually a cassette player that was recommended in the Red Book of the Apple II. So in trying to find exactly what model might go best for the Apple One, trying to make this look as authentic as possible, the first thing I did was I looked at the ACI manual, the Apple Cassette Interface manual that came from Apple, and they do list here, they say any cassette recorder will work well with the ACI. As a recommendation, we have found the least expensive, under $40 Panasonic to be very reliable and of good quality, although it is not equipped with the tape counter. So this definitely seems to represent a Panasonic tape recorder, but it doesn't say exactly what model. Now, as I mentioned, if you look over at the Red Book or the Apple reference manual for the Apple II, again, they have very similar language in here in terms of recommendations. It says cassette tape recorders in the $40 to $50 range generally have automatic level control, blah, blah, blah. And they talk about why that's important. But the language is very similar. And this manual came out a couple of years later after the Apple II was released. Then when we get a little bit further down and they start wrapping up this section, you can see a little asterisk here, and it says Apple Computer Incorporated has tested many types of cassette recorders, and so far the Panasonic RQ309DS, less than $40, similar language again, has an excellent track record for program loading. So if I was to make a bet, if they were to have recommended the exact model of Panasonic cassette recorder to use with the Apple One, it probably would have been this one, since it was available in 1976, the RQ309DS from Panasonic. And here it is, the Panasonic RQ309DS. So you can see that the styling actually didn't change too much between these units. They both kind of had a grill, or this one has kind of one of the mesh kind of ones, coverings over the speaker here. It really kind of looks the same, although you'll notice that the keys on this one just have the finger indent, whereas here they've actually been molded to include the symbols for play, rewind, etc. Now, one thing I will tell you that's very different about these two units is the weight. This one, I can pick it up easily. It almost weighs next to nothing. This one, though, when I pick it up, it is significantly heavier. In fact, let's just take a look and see what the weight difference actually is. So here's the scale from out of the kitchen. It's kind of helpful to test some of these things sometimes, especially weight. So let's first test the Panasonic RQ2102. And it's coming in at 1 pound and 13 ounces, so pretty light, actually. Now let's test the RQ309DS. Wow, 3 pounds, 10 ounces. So quite a bit heavier for this one. And I'm guessing if we opened this up, we would find that this is because this is using a lot less integrated circuits and a lot more discrete components. But yeah, it is substantially heavier, as you can see. The question is, will it work? These are notoriously bad. All cassette players that run on belts are notoriously bad for those belts disintegrating. And so we need to check that out and see if these actually work. The other thing we need to make sure is if the timing on these is still accurate, we may need to adjust the timing. As I discovered when I tried to make reproduction tapes for the Commodore 64, I'll put a link to that video up above, the timing of the motors goes off over time with these as well. And that can really make the loading of the cassette process very, very difficult, as you saw in that video. So we're definitely going to have to check the timing on this as well, if it will even work. Okay, it is working. Oh. Okay, so the sound did work. However, I heard it kind of garbled there. Oh, yeah. So it's not eating the tape. Eating the tape is, used to happen a lot with these players, but it is starting to crinkle the tape in there. And I don't want to ruin the tape necessarily. And obviously anything that we try to load on here would be affected by that, could be affected by that. So I think the next thing to do is to clean on both of these, the heads, the capstan, and the capstan roller, since it appears that the belts are actually functioning. I can't believe it. But I'll do that with a little isopropyl alcohol, and then we'll see if we get any better results. So at this point, I did go ahead and disassemble this cassette player. I wanted to make sure everything was clean on the inside. I did clean the heads, and I also cleaned this pinch roller, as well as using a little bit of sandpaper on it to kind of rough up this old rubber so it would grab the tape better as it passed through the mechanism. The next thing I wanted to test was the motor speed, as I mentioned, and so I actually pulled out a Spectrum Analyzer app on my phone, and I played a reference tape that I've purchased, which plays various frequency tones, and you can measure these on the Spectrum Analyzer very well on your phone. So if I was playing the 1 kilohertz tone, for example, if I noticed that the Spectrum Analyzer was reading it as above 1 kilohertz, then I know the motor's running too fast. If it's reading below 1 kilohertz, peaking at that point, then I know it's running a little bit too slow. Luckily, in this case, it seems like for both cassette recorders, the motors are running at the correct speed. So the original way to get computers into the Apple One was to use this, the Apple Cassette Interface. It has 2 ports on it, one for in and one for out. Yes, you can save your programs to cassette, but this was the original way to do it. Now, there have been some mods since then that make it a little bit easier to get programs into the Apple One, but this is what I'm going to be using today. In fact, I'm not even going to be using this particular card because It's very, very difficult to get your levels right, to get the audio right. And if you ever watched my C64 making reproduction tapes for the C64 episodes, there was 2 of them, I think, you'll know how difficult it is, even with a more modern system, modern compared to the Apple I anyway, you'll know how difficult it is to make tapes for those systems. In this case, though, this particular interface has been improved by Uncle Bernie, and he's got a write-up on Apple Fritter on how to improve this. And he was even kind enough to send me his improved version in the mail so that I could use it for this episode, and I'll be sending it back when I'm done. So thank you, Uncle Bernie, for that. The other thing I wanted to talk about is cables. So there's 2 different types of cables. There's more than 2, actually. There's 3 different types of cables you could use for this. One is your standard stereo audio plug with an 1/8" jack on either end. The problem is that most of these recordings were done in mono, or they've been split left and right into 2 channels when you're either downloading recordings from the internet or making them yourself based off of recordings that you can download. So there's the stereo type, which I would not recommend using. There's another type, which Uncle Bernie has sent me his own modified version of this as well, which takes the 2 stereo channels and combines them into one mono channel. So I've got stereo on this side, mono on this side, which is what the Apple cassette interface takes. It's only a 1-channel interface on that board. But this I found actually does more harm than good, at least for me. What I have found in my testing is that something about combining that stereo channel down into a mono channel in the cassette, either the timing's not right, I'm not exactly sure, it's somehow adding noise, but at least in my case, it's not actually working to go from stereo to mono and then have that feed into the Apple I. So what I'm using is just a mono to mono cable. So mono on one end, mono on the other. That means you're only going to be able to pick up 1 channel of audio. And on these old players, they have mono pickup heads anyway. What I found that works best is a mono to mono audio auxiliary jack, an 1/8" auxiliary jack, or a phono jack, whatever you want to call it. So even though I've fixed this old player from 1976, the audio quality was never super good anyway in these old decks. And, over time, there's just wear and tear on the player itself. And so it's always going to be more difficult to get recording loaded onto tape, initially, and then loaded back off tape. So to start with, I'm going to be loading programs with my phone. You can use the audio output on your phone and load recordings that way. Let me show you the process that I use that I found worked best to get recordings that are saved on the internet into a format on my phone that would then load into the Apple I. So I'm using Audacity to edit these files. I've got Audacity opened here, and I've got one of the Apple programs that I downloaded from the internet, and this is in the form of an AIFF file. I'm not going to go into all the different file variations, but you definitely want to try to stay away from compressed formats, so that being MP3s, and files, other compressed files. You want to use either preferably a WAV file, or FLAC could also be used, something that is lossless, because otherwise the compression could harm the audio quality and cause it, at least be more difficult for the computer to read that. But if I zoom in here, if I just take a little bit of a section here, we can take a look at what this WAV file looks like. And you can see here the 1s and 0s that are coming across in the audio file format. But you can also see that the levels here are actually quite low. The way that Audacity works here, you want these levels to be closer to the top of the bar here. In fact, here I can zoom in and you can see this a little bit better. We want to boost that up, and also it would be nice if we could flatten out these curves here so that they were a little bit easier for the computer to process. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Effect, and I'm going to go into Normalize. I'm going to normalize the peak amplitude to -4 dB. That's not bringing it right up to the top, but it's definitely going to make this file louder, and it'll clean up some of the discrepancies here. So if we hit OK on that, You can see now that I've just boosted this a little bit here and made it so that it'll be a little bit louder, a little bit easier for the computer to pick up. And this will be important if you're playing this off of a phone, which typically has the volumes coming out of your phone are going to be a little bit softer because they are expecting you to hook up a headphone and not, a loudspeaker system to your phone, for example. So the volume is going to be a little bit less anyway. But this normalization process, even though these waveforms are fairly clean, this would also work really well if you were to take a analog by means of an analog process. If you were to take the save a program onto tape, for example, and maybe you just saved it out onto an audio recorder or something like that, and you needed to boost the signals, this process would work for that as well. So that's what I've done with all the files I'm testing. And our good old friend Wendell Sanders has written up a guide on how to do this in more detail, including how to clean up those analog audio recordings. So I'm going to link to that in the description below as well. And now all you have to do is export this out as a WAV file, save it on your device, and you can use this to load into your Apple One. So now that we have our audio files ready to go, let's talk about how you actually load programs into the system. The way the Apple One works is, in order to load a program, whether it's BASIC or anything else, you need to call the address of where that program resides, followed by an R. So that means go to this hex address and run the program starting from that hex address. And it will load that into, using Wasmon, it will load that program for you. On the Apple cassette interface itself, there is a special extended range of memory where the program to load or save software is resident in the proms. And so you have to access that in order to load a program or save a program back out to cassette. So the address where that program lives is C100. So if I clear the screen here and hit reset, I can type in C100R. Again, that's going to run the program that lives at C100 essentially, but I say C100. So if I hit enter, then it returns C100 A9 star, and then there's a blinking cursor. The star represents that it's waiting for you to enter some information. And what we're going to enter is where we want the program to load. So these programs that were written for the Apple One are custom written to live at certain memory addresses. And so you need to load the program at that particular memory address so that as that program executes, it knows where to go for different pieces of information that it needs to run the program. For example, if we take a look at the BASIC user's manual, it shows how to load BASIC. Typically, you could get a cassette tape with BASIC on it for the Apple One. And it says here that you can type C100R and hit return, which we just did. And then it tells you what address to load the program into. In this case, it's E000, and then there's a dot, and then EFFF, and then R. So what that means is this program is going to reside in the address E000 through, that's what the dot means, EFFF. That's where it's going to load the program into that memory range. And then R at the very end means it's going to be a read operation to push bits into those memory addresses. Now, if you were to do a W, it would be reading information out of memory into cassette. But we're using R to say, read this from cassette, or actually we're going to be using our phone first. But anyway, it's going to say, open the cassette interface to read those data bits in and put them at that address. After the program loads, we can run the program by calling the first memory address of the program, in this case E000, with R at the end, and hit enter, and it should load BASIC for us. BASIC is a great thing to start with. A lot of programs actually need you to load BASIC first, and then drop out of BASIC and load programs into a different memory range, and then go back to BASIC to run the program. So any programs written in BASIC that you find on the internet, you're going to probably have to load BASIC first. And luckily, most of the programs actually tell you a couple of things, and I'll give you some places to go look for these programs and how to load them. The place that I like to go to is Wendell Sanders. I mentioned him in one of the other videos. He was an early employee at Apple and has done a lot of work with the Apple One. But he has a nice little collection of popular programs that you can load, and he gives you the memory address at which to load those programs and the run command to run the program. So that's a really valuable resource, and you're going to need to know that. You can't just hit load and start the tape like you could with a Commodore 64 or a TRS-80 color computer. It just doesn't work like that. So I'll type in E000.EFFFR, but before I hit enter, I'm going to get ready with my phone. I've got my phone plugged in to the card in the back. And if you look really closely at the ACI, you'll see from tape, and it's the lower of the two ports here. This one is the one you use to record. So that's audio going out from the computer. And this bottom one is the one audio going into the computer. So I've got that hooked up. I've got it hooked up to my phone. I've got the file loaded on my phone that we created. And I've got my phone set to 90% volume. So I'm going to hit enter and then hit play just a second after I hit enter. Hit enter here first, and then I'll hit play. There it goes. And these programs are fairly small. So this file only takes, this file is 41 seconds long. It takes roughly about 38 seconds to load in. Now the file is loaded, and I know that because it returned a slash and the cursor is blinking. So now hopefully, if everything went well, it's loaded that program into memory at the specific location. And I can run that by running the first memory location in the range where the program was loaded. So in this case, it's E000. So I can type E000R, and fingers crossed, let's hope this works. And it did not work. So one of the things that you can do to validate your files, if you look at that website that I linked in below, there's no necessarily like hash file that you can run to compare against. The functionality doesn't exist within the Apple One. But what you can do is you can print out the last few bytes of memory to see if they match up with the last few bytes that you can get from that website that I mentioned. He'll show you there, hey, you should look at the last few bytes and see if it worked. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try this again, turn up the volume maybe a little bit more, and see if it loads in correctly this time. Okay, now this time when I ran it returned a greater than prompt. And so this means that this is actually working. So now BASIC is loaded, hopefully correctly, and we should be able to go ahead and run something. So let's just type in print hello. Whoops. Okay, that's working again. I guess one of the shift keys was stuck. And there we go. Hello World is now running as you would expect. To break out of this, you just hit the escape key and that will stop. So that's BASIC. Now you could type in a program in BASIC, but probably what you're going to want to do is load a BASIC program. And this is where it gets a little bit complicated. I can break out of this program right now and go back to BASIC by typing E000R again. But when I do that, it clears the memory for BASIC. So there's another entry point for BASIC that you can go into. And if we take a look at the manual, it is E2B3. If you go to if you run E2B3R instead of E000R, it will load BASIC and retain memory. And the reason that's important is because the way that you load a BASIC program in is we have to go back and do that cassette routine, C1000R. And then that'll load the program into a certain area that BASIC knows, is familiar with. Then you have to go in at that other location and you can run a BASIC program. So let's try loading a BASIC program and see if it runs. Okay, so this is a BASIC Christmas program, it says, and following the load addresses from the website I linked in before, you can load in those addresses. Now you'll see here there's two addresses, and that's because we're going to load the first part of the program at one memory address in the other part of the program at the second memory address. Okay, I got a backslash. That doesn't necessarily mean that it worked, but it's better than not getting a backslash. If you don't get a backslash, that means that the cassette loader program isn't really even recognizing the signals to be able to load. So let's just go ahead. Like I said before, you can check if this program is correct by looking at the last few bytes of memory to see what they are listed as. So this is supposed to be last two bytes should be 5101. So we can load whatever's in 0FF0. I think that'll print out the whole thing. So let's see, 0FF. No, we don't want to do 08. Let's see, 0FFE is 51, so that's good. And then 0FFF is 01. So the second to the last byte is 51, and the last byte is 01. So that's really good. That means that this actually might be working. Now, as I said, to get back into BASIC, we're not going to run E000R. We're going to run E2B3R. Now we've got our prompt back, which means we're in BASIC, and I should just be able to hit run. So fingers crossed that this loaded correctly. Hey, look at that. It's an ASCII Christmas tree. Nice. So yeah, it brought us back to BASIC. Not a spectacular program or anything, but it seems to be working. Oh, look, and it just goes again in a loop. Really nice. Okay. Well, hey, we got one BASIC program to run, so that's something. Let's try another one. And before I try another one, actually, let's take a look at this program. We can list it out just like you would with any other BASIC. And you can see it's just printing out the ASCII art. You can also see where the lines are carrying over. It just wraps them around. So yeah, not a very big program, but hey, it works. Okay, I've loaded another game to try. This is Lunar Lander. And a lot of these games that you can find for the Apple I were actually adapted from the book 101 Basic Computer Games. You may be familiar with that because it was a very common one that was out in the early days of personal computers. So anyway, this was adapted from that book, and let's just see if it works. Okay, this is looking pretty good. So yeah, I'm not sure how to, I don't have the manual for this one, so I'm not exactly how to make this work. Okay, so I couldn't get Lunar Lander to work. I couldn't find the instructions. I even went back to the 100 Basic Programs book and looked at the instructions there. I just couldn't get anything to actually work. I'm sure there's rules out there somewhere, but the program did load. So I've got another one here, and this is actually from Uncle Bernie, who I know I've mentioned several times, but he actually wrote a game called Codebreaker, and it's similar to the game in the 100 Basic Programs book called Mastermind. And I'll let you go read the background on this. I think he, if I remember correctly, he was building a Kim 1 clone back in the day in the late 70s, mid to late 70s, and wrote this program for it. And then more recently updated that code to run on the Apple I. So pretty cool. And now I've got this loaded, and I actually have instructions for this one because when you download this, you can actually get the instructions with it. So I've got this ready to go. I know what the instructions are. And it's basically, like I said, like the name implies, it's a code breaking game where you need to guess what the answer to the puzzle is. So let's go ahead and I'm going to select rookie level since I haven't played this before. Level 0, round 6. Letters I can use is A through F. So I guess this is kind of a guessing game where you have to get the 4-letter code. Okay, so the instructions for this game, I mean, the game itself is a little bit difficult to understand what's going on, which doesn't surprise me coming from Bernie because he's very detailed. I'm sure it makes perfect sense to him. But basically, you and the computer are playing back and forth, trying to guess each other's codes. And you first take a guess, and the computer responds with how many letters are correct, that are correct and or in the same position. But it doesn't tell you exactly which ones. So, for example, in this one, I guessed AAAA. It responded with 2 stars and 2 minuses. That means 2 letters were correct and in the right position, and 2 were incorrect. So then I kept guessing to figure out which letters were in the code. And at the same time, after I guess, I come up with a code in my head. I came up with the same code. I was guessing AAAA. And it starts guessing, and you have to tell the computer whether he guessed right or not, and respond with the same in the same fashion. I went through and didn't win one. I'm going to play again, but this is a fun game. It's going to take some thinking to figure this out. It's not an easy game. So let me try one more time. So for example, in this one, I guessed B, 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 and none of those were right. I'm going to stick with my clue that I had last time, which was all A's. He guessed C, C, B, B, and that none of those are A, 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 of course. So I'm going to respond to him with minus, 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 minus. Now I get to guess again. I'm going to guess A, A, B, B, and see what happens. Oh, none of those are correct at all. So again, he has 1 letter right. And in the correct position. So I'm going to respond with star minus, minus, minus. I think that's right. Now let's do C, C, D, D and see what happens. Okay, so now I got a star. So that means one of these letters is correct and it's in the right position and the rest are wrong. Oh, and he guessed it. He guessed A, 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 A. So let's see what happens when I tell him that he guessed it. I win. So this is a pretty tough game, but it is kind of fun. It's very playable. So thanks to Uncle Bernie for porting over his old code onto the Apple One. So now let's try actually loading one of these programs from tape. The way that I'm going to make the tape is I'm going to use the same player to both record and play back. That way that'll minimize any differences in the motor speed. If I was to use, for example, this deck that you can see back here, which I've tuned already, if the motor speeds are different or something else is going on, then to play it on one and try to put that into this recorder and play it back would be playing at a different speed, a slightly different speed, and could impact the loading of the program. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play it off my phone and record it onto cassette and then play that back into the Apple One and see if it works. And I think to start with, we'll just load BASIC because that's going to be the one that you're going to use most often. Now, one thing you have to be careful of is if you're getting notifications on your phone while the audio is connected to the Apple One, those notifications are going to interrupt your data stream with extraneous noise and it won't load. So I recommend you turn all of your notifications to silent before you start this process. Okay, well in this case, I had this old Panasonic tape recorder set to volume 4. And I did get a slashback, so let's actually try to load BASIC and see if it runs. And it did not. So I got back FF, and I should have gotten back AC on that command. So this is definitely not working. So let me raise the volume and try one more time. All right, so I tried again with the volume on my phone set to 80% this time, or 82 or 78, something like that. And I also turned off all of my notifications because I think I was getting some notifications while I was trying to record onto the tape, which would have, of course, messed up the data stream.
Don't cross the streams. Why? It would be bad.
So I've actually got it loaded now, and I checked the last 2 bytes. The last one should be E0, and it is, because you can just type in the address and it will display what's at that address. So for example, EFFF comes back E0, and EFFE, which is the second to last byte, comes back 0C, and that's what they are supposed to be. So I can't check everything else, but at least this is a good indication that it actually loaded correctly from tape. Fingers crossed, let's run it and see if I get BASIC. Ta-da! That's what you should get. You should get 4C, and then it should give you the little prompt. So again, we can do it's a little basic program here. Now I'm not sure, I think in regular basic I can just type a semicolon after this to get it to not do a new line. Let's see if it works like that. 20, go to 10, run. Yeah, it does. You can actually do that. So basic is working totally fine, loaded from original, or not from a reproduced tape, played over the original tape recorder that would have been recommended, at least for the Apple II. So very, very cool. Now I have a complete system. With this experience, I could take some notes. I should have done that. And I could create duplicates of all of these so that if somebody wanted to get the experience of loading from tape, they absolutely could do that. So yeah, I'm pretty happy that this is actually working. So this actually completes the entire setup, not only from the look and feel in terms of the case and the monitor and the cassette recorder, but also in terms of functionality. This is working really, really well, and it's a lot of fun to play with. There are, not a lot of software actually out there written for the Apple I because it only existed for about a year, at least on sale. Of course, I'm sure people kept them and used them longer than that. But it wasn't around that long, and so there's just not a lot of software. I'm sure people wrote their own software, but there would have been no reason necessarily for them to keep those programs unless they were just a pack rat. So we've got what we've got. It does work, and it's a super interesting piece of history. And I'm really glad I spent the time to do it, although really time-consuming project. Be aware if you want to start this, you're going to probably be spending months on getting this thing right, even if you have time to work on it, 24/7. It's just going to take a long time to do a project like this. But in the end, totally worth it. I can now bring this to shows, vintage computer shows, or to the makerspace, or if someone just wanted to see it. It's just a really interesting piece of history. And now I have something that looks and feels and works exactly like it would have back in 1976. So I hope you enjoyed the series of episodes. If you did, I'd love if you could subscribe to the channel or at least like the video. That'll really help promote the channel on YouTube. If you're a Patreon, I always say that. If you're a patron on Patreon, you can actually stick around to the end and there'll be some commentary at the end, especially for you. And with that, I think maybe we'll load one more program. So to finish this episode out, I think I'll run a machine language program that someone wrote for the 30th anniversary of Apple. And it's basically ASCII art, but it is written in machine language. So with that, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. If you want to support me on Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/RetroHackShack and sign up.
End of line.